Sometimes, what we cherish most is exactly what destroys us. But you already know that, don't you, Olivia? After all, you're about to lose everything your parents spent 25 years building, unless you're willing to make a choice. The words of Preston and Mills' managing director echoed in my mind as I stood in the empty storefront of my family's gourmet food business. The early morning light filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating shelves that were half empty, a visual testament to our failing business. 8 years ago, I had walked away from a career that most people would kill for, and into what everyone assured me was certain failure. My name is Olivia, and this is the story of how I saved my family's business, only to have them try to hand it to my absentee brother. Olivia, darling, you shouldn't be here so early. My mother's voice, carrying its usual mix of disapproval and forced sweetness, interrupted my thoughts. I turned to face her, noting how she still managed to look impeccable at 6 a.m., her pearl necklace perfectly matched to her cream blazer. Michael called from Paris last night. He's finally coming home next month, and he has such wonderful ideas for the business. I felt my jaw tighten. Michael, my brilliant brother who hadn't set foot in the store for more than 3 days in the past 8 years. Michael, who had been finding himself in Europe while I mortgaged my apartment, worked 18-hour days, and transformed our failing local shop into a national brand. That's nice, Mom, I replied, maintaining my professional smile, the same one I'd perfected during years of investment banking. But right now, we need to prepare for the meeting with Meridian Capital. The investment team will be here in 3 hours. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, that. Well, perhaps we should wait for Michael's return before making any major decisions. He did graduate top of his class in business school, you know. I did know. We all knew. It was impossible not to know when she mentioned it at every family dinner, conveniently forgetting that I had done the same 5 years earlier while simultaneously saving the family business. 8 years ago, I had been the rising star at Preston and Mills. The youngest associate to be fast-tracked for directorship, with an income that made my mother grudgingly proud at social gatherings. Then came the call about my father's heart attack, followed by the discovery of just how badly the business was doing. The memory of that night is still crystal clear. Standing in this same spot, reviewing the books after hours while my father recovered in the hospital. The numbers told a story of slow but steady decline, a story that would end in bankruptcy within 3 months unless something changed dramatically. Let it go, Liv, Michael had said during one of his rare calls. Mom and Dad had a good run, but retail is dying. They can retire, maybe do some consulting. It's not your problem to fix. But it was my problem. Because behind the numbers, I saw something else, potential. Our artisanal products had a loyal following. Our brand had heritage. What we lacked was modern business acumen and the ability to scale. The next morning, I walked into Preston and Mills and handed in my resignation. The managing director, a mentor who had championed my career for years, looked at me like I had lost my mind. Investment banking to specialty foods? Olivia, you're throwing away a career that people would kill for. Your bonus this year would be more than your parents' shop makes in profit. I smiled, thinking of the business plan I had stayed up all night creating. Sometimes the best investments aren't the obvious ones. He sighed, shaking his head. At least tell me you've discussed this with your family. They support your decision? I hadn't, and they didn't. My mother's reaction when I announced my plan was a master class in passive-aggressive disapproval. Oh, darling, she had said, patting my hand in that condescending way that made me feel 12 again. It's sweet that you want to help, but business management really isn't your strength. When Michael finishes his MBA, he can take over. For now, just help your father with the books. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the storage room, and pouring every cent of my savings into modernizing our operations. 8 years of building an e-commerce platform from scratch, securing manufacturing partnerships, and expanding our product line. 8 years of watching my mother tell anyone who would listen about Michael's amazing business acumen, even as I increased our revenue by 3,000% and expanded distribution to 48 states. And now, standing in the early morning light of the store I had transformed, I was listening to her dismiss the biggest deal in our company's history, a major investment that would catapult us into national prominence, because her precious Michael might have ideas. The sound of cars pulling up outside broke through my thoughts. 3 black SUVs, right on time. Alexander Kingston and his investment team from Meridian Capital were nothing if not punctual. "Mom," I said, straightening my jacket, "this meeting is happening. The term sheet is ready, the projections are solid, and we are not waiting for Michael's ideas." She opened her mouth to protest, but the bell above the door chimed as Kingston and his team entered. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, he had the commanding presence one would expect from someone who controlled a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. "Ms. Smith," he said, extending his hand. "Impressive operation you've built here. Shall we get started?" My mother stepped forward, that social smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Kingston, we're so delighted you're here. Though perhaps we should wait a few weeks. My son Michael will be returning from Europe soon, and as the natural successor to the business." I watched Kingston's expression shift subtly, the same micro-expression I'd learned to read during my years in banking. It was the look of someone mentally recalculating a deal. In that moment, standing between my mother's casual dismissal of everything I'd built and Kingston's rapidly cooling interest, something crystallized in my mind. A plan I'd been subconsciously forming for years, born from every dismissed achievement and every comparison to Michael. "Mr. Kingston," I said, my voice carrying the quiet authority I developed over years of negotiations, "let's move this discussion to the conference room. I have something important to add to our proposal." The look my mother gave me was familiar, the same mixture of confusion and disapproval she'd worn when I announced my career change 8 years ago. But this time, I wasn't asking for approval. This time, I was about to teach my family the true cost of underestimating me. The conference room at Meridian Capital's headquarters felt impossibly quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled 30 stories below, but all eyes were fixed on the presentation screen where our company's growth projections painted an impressive upward trajectory. Alexander Kingston leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. 3,000% growth in 8 years. From a local specialty shop to national distribution. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. He turned to face me directly. "The question is, Ms. Smith, why seek outside investment now?" Before I could answer, my mother's voice cut through the room like a perfectly polished knife. "We believe it's the perfect timing, with my son Michael returning from his executive MBA program. He'll bring fresh perspectives to guide our expansion." I watched Kingston's team exchange glances. This wasn't how I had scripted this meeting. We had spent months preparing for this moment, and my mother had just casually tossed a hand grenade into the middle of it. "Perhaps," I said, keeping my voice steady, "we should focus on the current management structure that delivered these results." I clicked to the next slide, showcasing our customer acquisition metrics. Our subscription model has grown from 0 to 20,000 monthly customers in just 18 months. Mother's pearl necklace clinked softly as she shook her head. "Yes, dear, the creative marketing has been lovely. But Michael's experience in corporate strategy will be crucial for this next phase." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I could see Kingston making notes, his earlier enthusiasm notably dimmed. 8 years of work were unraveling in real time, all because of my mother's unshakable faith in her absentee son. "Mrs. Smith," Kingston said carefully, "our investment thesis was based largely on the current leadership's track record. Any significant management changes would require substantial discussion." Mother smiled, the same smile she used at country club gatherings. "Oh, but Michael has such impressive credentials. His professors at Wharton said." "Mom." My voice cut through her practiced speech. "Could we step outside for a moment?" In the hallway, the cityscape stretched out behind the glass wall, a glittering testament to ambition and power. Mother adjusted her pearls, a gesture I'd seen countless times when she was preparing to explain why I was wrong. "Olivia, dear, you're making this unnecessarily dramatic. We always knew Michael would take over eventually. You've done wonderfully with the day-to-day operations, but this level of expansion requires." "Requires what, Mom?" "An MBA? I have one. Corporate experience? I had that too, before I gave it up to save our family business. What exactly does Michael have that I don't, apart from being your firstborn son? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Michael has always had a natural head for business. Remember when he won that school competition in 6th grade? I remember. I also remember that I wrote his presentation because he was too busy with soccer practice. Just like I remember doing his math homework while you praised his natural talent for numbers. A door opened further down the hallway, and Kingston stepped out. Everything all right? We should resume if we want to finish before lunch. Mother straightened, social smile back in place. Actually, Mr. Kingston, I think we should postpone. Once Michael arrives. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Mr. Kingston, could you give us 5 more minutes? Once he had retreated, I turned back to my mother. Do you know how I paid for Michael's MBA? With my savings from the years I slept on a cot in our storage room, working 18-hour days to keep this company alive. While he was finding himself in Europe, I was rebuilding everything from the ground up. Olivia, you're being selfish. This is about the family legacy. Legacy? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Let me tell you about legacy, Mom. When I took over, we were 3 months from bankruptcy. Dad had mortgaged everything, and our suppliers were about to cut us off. Michael was unreachable, somewhere in the French Riviera. Do you remember what you said to me then? She looked away, but I continued. You said, don't get too attached to running things. This is just temporary until your brother can take over. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of my life, Mom. Every promotion I turned down, every vacation I skipped, every relationship I put on hold, all to build something you're ready to hand over to Michael because he has natural talent. You don't understand. Your father and I always had a plan. A plan that would have ended in bankruptcy if I hadn't stepped in. A plan that valued Michael's potential over my proven abilities. Well, guess what? I have a plan too. I pulled out my phone and sent a pre-written text. Within moments, the conference room door opened, and Julia, my former professor and mentor, stepped out. Behind her, I could see her legal team entering the room with Kingston's group. What's happening? Mother's voice had lost its polished edge. Plan B, I replied, watching another set of elevators open, delivering the executives from our 3 largest manufacturing partners. I'm giving you and Dad one chance to recognize reality. Either Michael takes a non-executive role reporting to me, or I walk away and take everything I've built with me. You can't do that. This is a family business. No, Mom. This stopped being just a family business the day I sacrificed my career to save it. These manufacturers? I gestured to the arriving executives. Their contracts are up for renewal next month. They've already agreed to follow me to a new venture. Our top-performing employees? 90% have equity agreements tied to my leadership, not the company name. The color drained from her face. You're bluffing. The Meridian investment was never about the Artisan Foods brand. Kingston's voice came from behind us. He had stepped out again, this time with his full team. We invested in Olivia's vision and execution. The term sheet makes that explicitly clear. Mother's hand went to her pearls again, but this time they offered no comfort. I need to call your father. And Michael. Michael can't save you from this, Mom. Not this time. You have until the end of this meeting to decide, recognize what I've built, or lose it all. Your choice. She stared at me for a long moment, seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years. Without another word, she turned and walked to the elevator, phone already at her ear. Kingston stepped closer as the elevator doors closed behind her. Brutal, but necessary. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? I watched the elevator numbers descend. 8 years of being the family placeholder teaches you to have contingency plans. And if they call your bluff? It's not a bluff when you hold all the cards. I turned toward the conference room where Julia's legal team was setting up. Shall we continue? I believe we were discussing the future of the company. The next 2 hours were a blur of presentations and contract discussions. Through the windows, I could see Mother in the building's courtyard, pacing and gesturing as she argued with someone on the phone, probably Dad, maybe Michael. It didn't matter anymore. By the time she returned, her perfectly maintained facade had cracked. The pearls were slightly askew, her expression stripped of its usual confidence. Father had arrived as well, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Your brother, Mother said, her voice tight, thinks we're being unreasonable. He says he never expected to just step in as CEO. She almost choked on the next words. He suggests we should respect your position. I kept my face neutral, even as satisfaction bloomed in my chest. Of course Michael hadn't wanted the responsibility. He never did. He just enjoyed being Mother's golden child, the hypothetical savior who never had to prove himself. Smart of him, I replied. So, what's your decision? Father stepped forward, finally finding his voice. We've been blind, Olivia. Blind and foolish. The company structure stays as it is, with you as CEO. No changes. Kingston's team immediately began updating the investment documents. Mother sank into a chair, her world visibly realigning itself. Father looked lost, decades of assumptions crumbling around him. One more thing, I added, sliding a folder across the table. New employment contracts for both of you. You'll transition to brand ambassadors, focusing on the heritage story that customers love. No operational authority. Mother's head snapped up. You're demoting us? In our own company? I'm protecting what I've built. You can sign, or you can watch me walk away with everything that makes this business valuable. Your choice. Again. The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as lawyers reviewed documents and terms were finalized. By the time the contracts were signed, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the conference room. Kingston approached as his team packed up. Remarkable execution. Though I have to ask, if they hadn't agreed, would you really have walked away from everything you've built? I watched my parents in the corner, huddled together, looking smaller somehow. Sometimes you have to be willing to burn it all down to build something stronger. He nodded thoughtfully. Your new company structure is actually more attractive from an investment standpoint. Cleaner, more professional. Everything's more valuable when you cut out the dead weight. As the room cleared out, Father approached me one last time. Olivia, I know it doesn't mean much now, but... I'm sorry. We should have seen. Save it, I interrupted, gathering my papers. We're not having a moment here. This was a business decision, nothing more. From now on, that's all we are to each other, business associates. Mother's sharp intake of breath echoed in the nearly empty room. But she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. As I rode the elevator down alone, I felt lighter than I had in years. 8 years of being the family placeholder had taught me patience. 8 years of watching Michael get credit for my work had taught me strategy. And today had taught them all what it costs to underestimate me. Morning light streamed through the windows of my corner office, but I had barely noticed the sunrise. The events of yesterday still felt surreal, like a fever dream of victories and burning bridges. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since dawn, messages from Michael, missed calls from relatives, and a flood of congratulatory emails from employees who had witnessed the showdown. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ashley, our marketing director and one of my most loyal supporters, stood in the doorway holding 2 coffee cups. You look like you haven't slept, she said, placing 1 cup on my desk. Though I'm not surprised, considering you just pulled off the corporate equivalent of a chess grandmaster's checkmate. I managed a tired smile. More like a corporate hostage negotiation. Have you seen the final contract revisions? Better than that, she grinned, pulling up something on her tablet. Have you seen Michael's latest Instagram post? He's in Paris, celebrating his sister's amazing achievement and announcing his new consulting venture, conveniently far away from here. Of course he was. Michael had always been skilled at reading which way the wind was blowing and adjusting his sails accordingly. Now that Mother's grand succession plan had imploded, he was already crafting a new narrative that cast him as the supportive brother who never wanted to steal my position. Ms. Smith. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your father is here to see you. I felt my jaw tighten. Not now. I have a strategy meeting in. Olivia. My father's voice cut through the intercom, sounding older and more uncertain than I'd ever heard him. Please. 5 minutes. Ashley raised an eyebrow in silent question. I nodded, and she slipped out as my father entered. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, his normally pristine suit slightly rumpled, his shoulders hunched under an invisible weight. The board meeting is at 10, I said, not looking up from my computer. Whatever this is can wait until. I sold my first batch of jam at a farmer's market, he interrupted, his voice distant as if lost in memory. Did you know that? Before the store, before everything. Just me with a folding table and 12 jars of strawberry preserves made from your grandmother's recipe. Dad. Let me finish, please. He sank into one of the visitor chairs. I was so proud that day. Sold every jar within an hour. People loved it. That's when I knew I could build something real. Something that would last. He finally met my eyes. Something I could pass down to my children. And you did, I replied coldly. To the child who actually cared enough to save it. Your mother and I, we were wrong. So wrong. We were stuck in old ways of thinking, old traditions. Traditions? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I sat for 8 years, it looked a lot more like sexism wrapped in parental favoritism. Yes, he said simply, surprising me. Yes, it was. And I was too weak to challenge it. Too comfortable letting your mother's prejudices dictate our family's future. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. That's why I'm giving you this. Inside was a document transferring his remaining shares to me. I don't understand. The contract only required. This isn't about contracts. This is about trust. About finally doing what I should have done years ago, betting everything on the right child. For a moment, I was that little girl again, desperately seeking his approval as I showed him my perfect math scores. The little girl who watched him beam at Michael's C+ because, at least he tried his best. It's too late for this, I said, pushing the envelope back. Way too late. I know. He stood slowly, leaving the envelope on my desk. But I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to make it right. Starting with this. After he left, I sat staring at the envelope until Ashley returned with Nathan and Victoria in tow. My core team, the ones who had stood by me through every late night and crisis. Your mother's in the lobby, Nathan reported. She's demanding to see the new marketing materials before they go live. Old habits die hard, Victoria added. Want me to have security escort her out? I thought about my father's envelope, about decades of ingrained behaviors and prejudices. No. Let her come up. It's time she sees exactly what her temporary caretaker has built. Mother swept into the conference room 10 minutes later, her composure restored after yesterday's breakdown. But something was different, a slight hesitation in her step, a barely perceptible tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. The brand heritage section of the website, she began without preamble, it needs to accurately reflect reality? I finished, gesturing to the presentation screen where our new company narrative was displayed. Let's take a look, shall we? The screen filled with images, me working the counter in the early days, sleeping on the storage room cot, celebrating our first major contract. 8 years of history documented by security cameras and employee photos. This isn't appropriate, Mother protested. The story should focus on the family legacy, on your father's vision. The story, I cut in, will focus on truth. On how a failing family shop was transformed into a national brand through innovation and hard work. Your role as brand ambassadors is to support that narrative, not rewrite it. You can't just erase 25 years of history. No, but I can ensure it's accurately represented. Just like I can ensure that every interview, every press release, every public appearance reflects what actually happened here. How does that narrative sound, Mom? The one where you nearly handed a multi-million-dollar company to an absentee son over the daughter who built it? She sank into a chair, her facade cracking again. You're punishing us. No, Mom. I'm finally telling my story. The real story. The one you never wanted to hear because it didn't fit your preconceptions about what a daughter should be or do. And Michael? He's your brother, regardless of. Michael made his choice 8 years ago when he left me to clean up your mess. He's made another choice now, reinventing himself as the supportive brother who never wanted the CEO position. Smart of him, really. Very on brand. A knock at the door interrupted us. Kingston and his team had arrived for the board meeting. As Mother rose to leave, she paused. The house, your father's shares, was that your doing? No, I replied, watching her process this new blow to her worldview. That was all Dad. Turns out he finally figured out which child deserved his trust. The board meeting that followed was a master class in professional transition. Kingston's team presented updated projections, expansion plans, and marketing strategies. My parents sat quietly in their new roles as brand ambassadors, watching their company's future being mapped out without their input. When Michael called halfway through the meeting, I let it go to voicemail. Whatever reinvention of history he was crafting could wait. I had a company to run. As the sun set over the city that evening, I stood in my office looking out at the skyline. Ashley appeared at my side, holding 2 glasses of champagne. To the new CEO, she said, handing me one. Officially and irrevocably. To truth, I corrected, taking a sip. And to loyalty. I couldn't have done this without you all. Oh please, she laughed. You're Olivia Smith. You could have done this with one hand tied behind your back. We just made it more fun. My phone buzzed with another message from Michael. Hey, sis, thinking of coming home for Christmas. We should talk about future opportunities. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. You know, Ashley said, watching me, your mother was right about one thing. This is about legacy. Just not the one she imagined. No, I smiled, raising my glass. This is about something much simpler. This is about getting exactly what you earn. No more, no less.